Welcome back to the Word on Fire Institute lecture series, The Idolatry of Identity, Progressive Wokeist Ideology, and the Catholic Response. In the previous two lectures, we examined how Catholic social thought can respond to progressivism's problems with moral relativism, tyrannical utopianism, and its undermining of universal human dignity. In this final lecture, I'll highlight two additional problems: progressivism's nihilistic evasion of hypocrisy and its rejection of free speech, explain the Catholic response to both, and then conclude with a synthesis of the ideology's errors under a single despotic banner that everyone who cares about authentic justice and peace should categorically reject: the idolatry of group identity. Now, despite the clouds of moral dust progressivism produces with its unrelenting political demands, it is, at its core, relativistic in nature. As argued throughout these lectures, it does not, because it cannot, believe in universally objective moral truth. This moralistic nihilism means, among many other implications, that progressivism rejects the existence of moral absolutes, either in the form of categorical prohibitions, thou shalt not, or positive injunctions, thou shalt. In this sense, the ideology tends to embrace a consequentialist model for moral calculations. Yet instead of applying the model to society as a whole, it applies it specifically to the political interests of the identity group, namely, how do we get more power? Consequently, progressivism has no conceptual mechanism to identify or criticize hypocrisy because it contains no objectively fixed standards that it could violate either in belief or action. I noted previously how this approach entails jettisoning members of an identity group who do not toe the ideological line, but it also applies to any other threat the identity group perceives to its interests. For example, Progressive Democrat Representative Maxine Waters of California once said the following to an agitated crowd about how to engage with members of then President Trump's administration. Quote, "If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them that they're not welcome anymore anywhere." Unquote. In other words, Waters is instructing her followers to physically harass and threaten members of the opposing political party, even when they are doing private, personal activities. The same representative also later called for protesters to get, quote, more confrontational, unquote, with police in the streets and to ignore any curfews that may be imposed, meaning break the law, if the jury did not return the verdict she wanted against Derek Chauvin, a police officer who was indeed found guilty of killing George Floyd. These and other similar examples show how progressivism can readily justify calls not only for protest, but even for violence if that will support a desired ideological outcome. However, other self-identified progressive politicians who have never criticized Waters for her inflammatory remarks have denounced as violent or calling for violence even the quotation of their own words. For example, in a 2021, a pro-Israel political action group paid for advertisements criticizing Progressive Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota for morally equating the United States and Israel with the Taliban and Hamas by using Omar's exact words from one of her tweets. Omar wrote, quote, "We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban," unquote. Now, in response to the advertisement, Representative Omar's office tweeted, "Make no mistake, the political advocacy group that published the ad is putting Representative Omar's life at risk with repeated Islamophobic attack ads," unquote. In other words, progressives can refrain from criticizing Maxine Waters for calling for actual political violence while denouncing their critics as violent merely for quoting verbatim their own words. Now, to be sure, There is no political movement without hypocrisy, and all of it should be identified and condemned as such whenever and wherever it occurs, which is a full-time job. However, that points to the main problem at the heart of progressive ideology. It has made itself immune to the charge of hypocrisy because it has given itself a carte blanche to define and redefine terms and logical relationships. Thus, progressivism can call for spray painting public spaces as an act of free speech when it is in support of Black Lives Matter, yet support the arrest of pro-life activists who write Black preborn lives matter in public spaces with chalk. The calls for tolerance and diversity, equity, and inclusion can be weaponized to mean coercively shutting down businesses that disagree with progressive views on sexuality and gender. And of course, as noted above, people can be fired because of their skin color in the name of combating racism. It is crucial to recognize that according to the shadow logic of progressivism, these examples and countless more are not hypocritical and therefore do not deserve any moral scrutiny. They are justified because they serve the identity group's political aims. As I have argued throughout, the Catholic social thought tradition stands diametrically opposed to this relativistic and tyrannical political paradigm. Are there Catholic hypocrites out there? Oh, you bet. But I'll take a hypocrite over a nihilist any day. Hypocrites might, at the very least, be professing good beliefs, even if their actions stink to high heaven. Progressive ideology's moralistic nihilism, on the other hand, will congratulate itself for practicing nonviolence as it dons its ski masks, tightens its military boots, stuffs its Molotov cocktails, and pours out into the dark streets looking to save the world by burning it to the ground. Given this nihilistic moral foundation or anti-foundation, it should come as no surprise that progressive ideology, in the end, has zero interest in protecting free speech. Here, it is crucial to stress how important Catholicism's embrace of moral realism, the belief that there is an objectively real moral order that contains objectively fixed moral principles that correspond with objectively stable meanings of words and ideas, is as an antidote to the threat progressive ideology poses to free speech and correspondingly to freedom of religion. If there's ultimately no ontological or metaphysical connection between words and reality, meaning that the language is purely a social construct fabricated by the most powerful, then words will mean anything that the powerful want them to mean. Within this relativistic paradigm, moreover, if you happen to be in one of the groups that has less power than the dominant group, there is no argument you can make, no rational case you can build against the threat of aggression. The progressive conception of reality can be nothing more than a dog-eat-dog world in which power, raw coercive power, is the only principle of social organization. In the end, then, it is only a political paradigm that both recognizes the existence of objective rationality and invests that rationality with the power to identify objective goods in existence that can stand up both for the truth itself and for the search for truth, which includes a fundamental right to speak according to the best lights of your conscience. In other words, for all the criticism secularity heaps on Catholicism for being politically intolerant or against free thinking or desiring to impose its views on others, all inaccurate, by the way, it is precisely the Catholic part of Catholic social thought that supports a universal and inviolable right to freedom of speech. Progressivism, in contrast, cannot support such a right, both because of its moral relativism and because such rights stand in the way of consolidating group power. In the end, I believe all these issues with progressivism can finally be captured within one overarching problem: the idolatry of group identity. That is, making the good of a factional group the highest good any individual can and should live for, which in turn morally authorizes the group to say and to do whatever it wants to pursue its interests. Now, to be sure, other ideologies also contain their own idolatries. Utilitarianism, for example, makes an idol out of pleasure, and classical liberalism and libertarianism make an idol out of the autonomy of the self. Yet I believe it is progressivism that represents the most old-school form of idolatry. Indeed, it is a form of idolatry that reaches all the way back to the primordial garden. What did the serpent tell Eve when the forbidden fruit first caught her eye? Read Genesis 3, 4 through 6. You will certainly not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is the original attraction of sin. You will be like gods. You will determine good and evil. In dismantling the moral barriers imposed by classical liberalism and libertarianism and appropriating to its own will even the definition of pleasure itself, progressivism, among all the other political ideologies, seeks to fulfill the serpent's promise. You get to redefine lies as truth. You get to trounce through the garden of humanity, damning whom you will and redeeming whom you will. You get to do whatever you want while cursing those who do exactly the same as you do. In short, you get to be temporal gods, demanding worship for your unearned virtue and sacrifice for your never-ending wrath. To be sure, every god wishes he, she, or Z were the only god. But progressivism teaches that the second best alternative, since wannabe divinities so crowd the landscape, is to ally with those who look like you, and talk like you, and dress like you, and are from the same place as you, and to fight with every means necessary against your competitors, those who have what you want or are trying to get what you already have. Fighting fire with fire and beating the dominant tribes at their own game may indeed lead to a victory here and there. But the problem is it's never going to last. All tribal wars are eventually lost. And they're lost not only because there's always another tribe coalescing against you and your tribe, ready and motivated to take all the ground you've just conquered or reconquered. They're lost because the whole war is being fought entirely on the serpent's terms and entirely for his pleasure. The snake's first trick was to turn men and women against each other. His second was to sever blood brothers. His third, to divide the human family itself. And his fourth, to convince all of us that the active threat of mutual destruction is the only thing we have in common. Progressivism promises the oppressed tribe du jour a rousing and humiliating defeat of their oppressors. Yet it does so while winking at the oppressors, whispering that they not ought to worry too much because they'll have their revenge soon, all while signaling to the neutral tribes that they better pick a side and do it quickly if they hope to survive the coming hostilities. The Catholic social thought tradition, in contrast, teaches that the only way to win this internecine war of tribal supremacy is not to fight it in the first place. Indeed, if we could all just pause the circular firing squad for just a moment, we'd see that the real enemy, it isn't each other. It's not even ourselves. Look down. The enemy is that damned snake. And overcoming him and his false promises is what really can unite us all. Thanks for spending this time with me. If you'd like to learn more about the moral and political resources of the Catholic social thought tradition and everything else related to Catholicism and the culture, please consider becoming a member of the Word on Fire Institute by visiting wordonfire.org and clicking on Institute. That's wordonfire.org and then click on Institute. God bless you all, and in the words of St. John Paul II, be not afraid.